My name is Dennis Wilson, and I just turned 70 last month. After decades of hard work, I finally get to enjoy my retirement in my dream beachfront home, something I never imagined possible growing up poor. The small electrical repair business I started in my garage somehow turned me into a millionaire. Life was peaceful until last Tuesday when my son Theodore showed up at my doorstep with his wife Lisa. I had not seen or spoken to him in 13 years, not since our big fight. But suddenly, there he was, eyeing my house with dollar signs in his eyes. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you want to hear what happened when my estranged son discovered I had become wealthy. I was born in a small town in Ohio to hard-working parents who never had much money but taught me the value of honest work. My father worked at the local factory while my mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. From a very young age, they instilled in me the importance of saving money and working hard for what you want in life. There were no handouts in our household. By the time I was 14, I was already working after school at the local hardware store, stacking inventory and sweeping floors for pocket money. I watched other kids my age spend their afternoons playing baseball or hanging out at the diner while I learned how to fix things and deal with customers. Back then, I sometimes resented it, wishing I could just be a normal teenager, but those early years shaped who I became. I always dreamed of going to college, maybe studying engineering since I had a knack for understanding how things worked. But when high school graduation came around, my family simply could not afford it. Instead of pursuing higher education, I took a full-time job at the same hardware store, working my way up from stock boy to sales associate within a year. Life took an unexpected turn when I met Barbara at a friend's birthday party in the summer of '67. She had the most beautiful smile and a laugh that could light up the whole room. We started dating, and within 6 months, I knew she was the one. I was only 22, and she was 21 when we got married in a small ceremony at the local church. Neither of us had much money, but we were young and in love, convinced that was all we needed. A year after our wedding, Theodore was born. We called him Ted for short. I still remember the first time I held him in my arms, this tiny human being with Barbara's eyes and my stubborn chin. The overwhelming feeling of love mixed with fear nearly knocked me off my feet. I made a silent promise that day to give my son everything I never had growing up. I wanted him to have opportunities, to go to college, to never worry about money the way I did. To keep that promise, I worked harder than ever before. I took on multiple jobs, working days at the hardware store, and evenings doing repair work for neighbors. Barbara stayed home with Ted, and money was always tight. We lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment, counting every penny and stretching every dollar as far as it would go. When Ted was 5, I took the biggest risk of my life. I quit my job at the hardware store and started my own small business repairing electrical appliances. The first year was brutal. There were months when we barely made rent, when I would skip meals so Ted could have enough to eat. Barbara started working part-time as a receptionist to help with the bills while I built up my client base. My business slowly grew, but it demanded all of my time and energy. I would leave before Ted woke up and come home after he was asleep. Weekends were often spent on emergency repair calls rather than family outings. I told myself it was all for him, that I was sacrificing time now so he could have a better future. In hindsight, perhaps that was my first mistake. As Ted grew older, I noticed he was developing habits that concerned me. Barbara doted on him, giving him whatever he wanted to make up for my absence. She never made him do chores or earn his allowance. When I tried to implement some responsibility, like mowing the lawn or taking out the trash, it would lead to arguments between Barbara and me. By the time Ted was a teenager, the pattern was set. He expected things to be handed to him and showed little initiative or drive. His grades were mediocre at best, despite his obvious intelligence. When I tried to talk to him about working harder in school, about the importance of developing good habits, he would roll his eyes and tell me that I was being too strict. Barbara and I disagreed fundamentally on how to raise our son. I believed in teaching him self-reliance and the value of hard work. She wanted to give him everything and protect him from any hardship or disappointment. Our arguments about Ted became more frequent and more heated as he got older. The tension in our marriage finally reached a breaking point when Ted was 16. After years of growing apart, Barbara asked for a divorce. I was devastated but not entirely surprised. We had become strangers living in the same house, connected only by our love for our son. The divorce proceedings were relatively civil, but the outcome was predictable. Barbara got primary custody of Ted, with me having visitation rights every other weekend. The day I moved out of our family home into a small apartment above my shop was one of the saddest days of my life. Ted blamed me entirely for the divorce. In his 16-year-old mind, if I had just worked less and been home more, if I had just agreed with Barbara on everything, our family would still be intact. He became increasingly hostile during our weekend visits, sometimes refusing to come altogether. Barbara made excuses for him, saying he was just processing his feelings, but I knew our relationship was fracturing beyond repair. The summer after the divorce, Ted got his first car. I had saved up to help him buy a reliable used vehicle, thinking it would be a good lesson in responsibility. Instead, Barbara surprised him with a brand new sports car for his birthday, something we never could have afforded together. When I expressed concern about the extravagance and the message it sent, Ted accused me of being jealous and resentful of his mother's generosity. That was the beginning of a pattern that would continue for years. Barbara undermining any attempt I made to teach Ted about financial responsibility, and Ted growing more entitled and less appreciative of anything I tried to do for him. When it came time for college, Ted had his heart set on a prestigious private university with a hefty price tag. Despite our strained relationship, I agreed to pay for his tuition. My business was doing better by then, and even though money was still tight, I believed education was the best investment I could make in his future. Barbara handled the living expenses and spending money, which I later discovered was far more generous than necessary for a college student. Ted decided to major in business administration, not because he had any passion for it, but because he thought it would be an easy path to making money without too much effort. His college years were a blur of average grades and active social life. Whenever I asked about his studies, he would give vague answers about everything being fine and quickly change the subject. During his junior year, Ted met Lisa at a fraternity party. The first time he brought her home during spring break, my alarm bells went off immediately. Lisa was undeniably beautiful, with designer clothes and a constant eye on material possessions. Within the first hour of meeting her, she had commented on the size of our TV, asked what year my car was, and hinted about Ted taking her to an expensive restaurant for dinner. When Ted stepped out to take a phone call, Lisa casually mentioned how her previous boyfriend had bought her a diamond bracelet for her birthday. The implication was clear. Later, when I tried to talk to Ted privately about my concerns, he became defensive immediately. "You just don't like anyone I date," Ted snapped. "Lisa comes from a good family. Her dad is a successful attorney. Just because she has standards does not mean she's materialistic." I tried to explain that I only wanted him to be with someone who valued him for who he was, not what he could provide, but he refused to listen. The more I expressed concern about Lisa, the more determined he seemed to be with her. After graduation, Ted struggled to find a job. His mediocre grades and lack of internship experience put him at a disadvantage in a competitive market. He moved back home with Barbara, who was more than happy to support him indefinitely. Lisa, meanwhile, had graduated with a communications degree but showed no interest in finding full-time employment. She picked up occasional part-time work at boutiques, mainly to get employee discounts on clothes. 6 months after graduation, Ted called and asked to meet for lunch. I was hopeful that he wanted to reconnect and perhaps ask for advice on his job search. Instead, he announced that he and Lisa were engaged. They had been dating for less than 2 years. "Congratulations," I said carefully. "That's a big step. Do you have a job lined up yet?" "Not yet," he admitted. "But Lisa's dad knows some people. Something will come through soon." "And where are you planning to live?" I asked. "That's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about," Ted said, fidgeting with his napkin. "Lisa and I want to have a nice wedding, and afterward, we're going to need a place to live. A house, not an apartment." My heart sank as I realized where this conversation was heading. We were thinking, "Since you've always said you wanted to support my future, that you could help us out," he continued. "Lisa has been planning this wedding since she was a little girl. Her parents are contributing, but it's going to be expensive." "How expensive?" I asked. When he named the figure, I nearly choked on my coffee. It was more than I had made in the past 3 years combined. "Ted, I can't afford that," I said honestly. "And even if I could, I don't think starting your married life with that kind of extravagance is a good idea." His face darkened. "Mom said you'd say that," She said, "You're always so cheap when it comes to family, but you'll spend money on your business without blinking." "It's not being cheap," I tried to explain. "It's being realistic. I can help you with a modest wedding, and maybe assist with a down payment on a starter home once you both have stable jobs, but what you're asking for is not possible." The conversation quickly deteriorated from there. Ted accused me of never supporting him, of always making him feel like a disappointment. I tried to stay calm, to explain that real support meant helping him build a sustainable future, not funding an unsustainable lifestyle. "Dad, other parents help their kids get started in life," he argued. "Lisa's parents bought her brother a condo when he graduated. That's what families do." "No, Ted," I said firmly. "That's what some families do. But it's not what I can do, and frankly, not what I think is best for you." By the end of lunch, Ted was furious. We parted ways with tension thick between us, but I thought he would calm down and we would talk again. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received a formal invitation to their wedding. The date was set for just 3 months away, and it was clear they were proceeding with the lavish plans despite our conversation. I called Ted, hoping to reason with him, but Lisa answered his phone. "Ted doesn't want to talk to you right now," she said coldly. "He told me what you said. If you can't be happy for us and support us the way parents should, then maybe you shouldn't come to the wedding at all." I attended the wedding despite the tension. It was every bit as extravagant as Ted had described, with ice sculptures, a 7-tier cake, and party favors that probably cost more than my first car. Barbara had apparently refinanced her house to help pay for it, a fact she made sure to mention loudly whenever I was within earshot. At the reception, I was seated at a table far from the wedding party, with distant relatives and colleagues from Barbara's office. When I approached Ted to offer my congratulations, he accepted my hug stiffly and quickly moved on to other guests. Lisa barely acknowledged me, turning away to speak to her bridesmaids when I came near. As I watched them during their first dance, I wondered how they planned to maintain this lifestyle. Ted had finally found an entry-level position at a marketing firm, and Lisa still wasn't working full-time. The math simply didn't add up. My concerns were validated a month after the wedding when Ted called, asking to borrow money for their rent. Against my better judgment, I agreed, hoping this might be an opportunity to rebuild our relationship. But one loan turned into another, and another. Each time, there was a different emergency, a different unexpected expense. When Ted called asking for money the 6th time in as many months, I finally put my foot down. "Ted, this can't continue," I told him. "You and Lisa need to create a budget and stick to it. If you can't afford your current apartment, you need to find something less expensive." "We can't live in some dump, Dad," he protested. "What would Lisa's friends think?" "I don't care what her friends think, and neither should you," I replied. "This is about living within your means." "Easy for you to say," Ted shot back. "You could help if you wanted to. You just choose not to because you've never liked Lisa. Admit it." The conversation escalated quickly. Ted accused me of being stingy and uncaring. I accused him of being irresponsible and entitled. When Lisa got on the phone and suggested that I should sell my business to give them the money they needed to buy a house, something in me snapped. "This stops now," I said firmly. "I love you, Ted, but I will not fund this unsustainable lifestyle. If you and Lisa want the finer things in life, you'll have to earn them yourselves, just like I did." "Fine," Ted spat into the phone. "If that's how you feel, then don't bother calling anymore. We're done." And just like that, he hung up. I tried calling back several times over the next few days, but my calls went straight to voicemail. I sent emails that went unanswered. I even drove to their apartment, but no one came to the door, though I could see movement behind the curtains. The final blow came a week later when I received a letter, formally typed and coldly worded, stating that Ted no longer wished to have any contact with me. He accused me of emotional abuse through financial manipulation and declared that unless I was willing to provide the support he felt entitled to as my son, he wanted nothing more to do with me. I was devastated. Despite our differences, despite the tension, I had never imagined my only child would cut me out of his life completely. I read that letter 100 times, looking for some hint of the little boy I had once held in my arms, but found only the entitled adult he had become, influenced by the materialistic values of his mother and wife. In my darkest moments, I questioned everything. Had I worked too much? Had I been too strict? Too distant? Should I just give Ted what he wanted to keep him in my life? But deep down, I knew that would only enable behavior that would ultimately make him unhappy. Real love sometimes means standing firm, even when it's painful. So I respected his wishes. I stopped calling. I stopped writing. I missed my son terribly, but I had to accept his decision, hoping that someday he would gain the maturity to understand why I had taken the stance I did. The first few months after Ted's letter were the hardest. I would pick up the phone to call him, only to remember his words and put it down again. I wrote letters I never sent, filled with explanations, apologies, and pleas for understanding. Birthdays and holidays were particularly difficult. I still bought him presents, keeping them in a closet, unable to give them up, even though I had no way to deliver them. I sent a card for their first anniversary with a modest check enclosed. It was returned unopened. I tried again at Christmas, with the same result. After a year of rejection, I finally accepted that Ted was serious about cutting me off completely. The pain of losing my son was always there, a dull ache that never quite went away. I thought of him constantly, wondering what he was doing, if he was happy, if he ever thought of me. But life had to go on, and I turned my attention to the one thing I could control, my business. What had once been a small electrical repair service operating out of my garage had grown into a respectable local business with 3 employees and a proper storefront. We specialized in fixing high-end appliances, filling a niche that the big box stores ignored. Business was steady, but not spectacular. I made enough to live comfortably, but certainly wasn't getting rich. With my personal life in shambles, I threw myself into work with renewed energy. I extended our hours, improved our advertising, and personally handled our most complicated repairs. The distraction was therapeutic, giving me something to focus on besides my estrangement from Ted. In the 3rd year after our falling out, I had a stroke of luck. A customer brought in an expensive refrigerator that kept running constantly, driving up their electric bill. While diagnosing the problem, I realized there was a design flaw in the thermostatic control system. As I repaired it, an idea began to form. Over the next few months, I developed a simple device that could be installed in most major appliance brands to make them more energy efficient. It was nothing revolutionary, just a smart little adapter that prevented energy waste through more precise temperature control. I called it the Power Saver. Initially, I just installed the Power Saver for local customers, who were thrilled with the reduction in their utility bills. Word of mouth spread, and soon I had people coming from neighboring towns specifically requesting the device. Sensing an opportunity, I took out a small loan to patent my invention and produce a limited run of Power Savers to sell directly to consumers. The timing could not have been better. Energy costs were rising nationwide, and environmental consciousness was growing. People were looking for ways to reduce their carbon footprint while saving money. The Power Saver did both, paying for itself within months through reduced electricity bills. A reporter from the local paper did a story on my invention, which was picked up by a regional business magazine. That caught the attention of a buyer from a national hardware chain who contacted me about potential distribution. After tense negotiations, and with the help of a lawyer who believed in my product, I signed my first major contract. The transition from small business owner to manufacturer was not easy. I had to learn about supply chains, quality control, and mass production. There were sleepless nights and moments of panic when I wondered if I had gotten in over my head. But I persevered, remembering all those years of fixing things with my own hands, understanding how they worked from the inside out. As the Power Saver gained popularity, other retailers came calling. Within 5 years of inventing it, my product was available in stores across the country. The small company I had started in my garage now employed over 50 people and occupied a real manufacturing facility. For the first time in my life, I had significant money in the bank. Success brought new challenges. Competitors tried to create knockoffs of my product. Larger companies approached with buyout offers. I navigated these waters carefully, protecting my patent vigorously and declining offers that didn't value what I had built appropriately. I remembered all too well what it felt like to have nothing and was determined to secure my future. In the 10th year after Ted cut me off, I received an offer I couldn't refuse. A major multinational corporation wanted to acquire my company for a sum that would make me a multimillionaire. After months of negotiations, I agreed to sell, with conditions that protected my employees' jobs and ensured the Power Saver would continue to be manufactured with the same quality standards. Just like that, The working-class kid who couldn't afford college was a multi-millionaire. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now I had the money Ted had wanted from me, but he wasn't in my life to know about it. I wondered if he ever saw the power saver in stores and recognized my name on the packaging. With financial security came the freedom to live however I wanted. I bought my dream house, a beautiful property overlooking the ocean that I had admired for years. It was far larger than what one person needed, with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a wraparound porch where I could sit and watch the waves. Sometimes I imagined filling it with family, with grandchildren running through the halls, but those were just dreams. Despite my newfound wealth, I maintained my modest lifestyle in most ways. I still drove the same car, still shopped at the same stores, still ate at the same diner every Sunday morning. The extravagance of my house was my one indulgence, a reward for decades of hard work and sacrifice. Throughout those 13 years of silence, I occasionally heard news about Ted through mutual acquaintances. None of it was particularly encouraging. He had changed jobs frequently, never staying at one company for more than a year or two. Lisa still didn't work consistently, picking up the occasional part-time position but quitting whenever the job became too demanding. According to Barbara, who reluctantly shared information during our rare interactions, Ted and Lisa lived beyond their means consistently. They rented expensive apartments they couldn't afford, leased luxury cars they couldn't pay for, and took vacations they had to put on credit cards. The pattern I had feared had come to pass exactly as I predicted. I considered reaching out several times, especially after hearing they had been evicted from an apartment for non-payment of rent. But each time, I stopped myself, remembering the coldness in Ted's voice during our last conversation. He had made his choice, and until he was ready to take responsibility for his own life, my intervention would only enable further dependence. So I lived my life, running my company until I sold it, and then enjoying a comfortable retirement. I volunteered at the local community center teaching basic home repair skills to teenagers. I traveled modestly, seeing places I'd always wanted to visit. I made new friends and built a peaceful life for myself. The pain of losing Ted never went away entirely, but it had dulled with time, becoming a quiet sadness rather than the sharp grief of the early years. Then came that Tuesday morning when my doorbell rang, and everything changed. It was a perfect spring day. I had been up since dawn, enjoying my morning coffee on the porch while watching dolphins play in the distance. The air was crisp, with just enough warmth from the sun to make it comfortable. These quiet mornings were my favorite part of retirement, a peaceful time to reflect and appreciate the life I had built. My house sat on a bluff, overlooking the Pacific, with large windows that filled every room with natural light. The interior was open and airy, with hardwood floors and comfortable, quality furniture. Nothing flashy or ostentatious, just well-made pieces that would last a lifetime. The walls were decorated with local artwork and photos from my travels. It wasn't a showplace, but it was undeniably beautiful and obviously expensive. I had just come inside to refill my coffee cup when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most of my friends called before visiting, and delivery packages usually arrived later in the day. Curious, I walked to the front door and peered through the peephole. The shock of seeing Ted standing on my porch nearly made me drop my coffee mug. He looked older, of course. 13 years will do that. His hair was thinner, and he had put on weight around the middle. Beside him stood Lisa, still attractive but with a hardness to her face that hadn't been there before. She was dressed expensively. Her handbag alone probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door. 1,000 emotions crashed through me at once. Joy at seeing my son after so many years. Confusion about why he was suddenly here. Hope that perhaps he had changed and wanted reconciliation. And lurking beneath it all, suspicion about his timing and motives. I opened the door, and for a long moment we just stared at each other. Ted looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Lisa plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Dad," Ted finally said, his voice deeper than I remembered. "Ted?" I managed to reply, my throat suddenly dry. "This is a surprise." An awkward silence followed until Ted gestured vaguely at the door. "Can we come in?" I stepped back, allowing them to enter. As they walked into the foyer, both their heads swiveled, taking in the high ceilings, the expansive views, the obvious signs of wealth. Lisa let out a low whistle. Nice place, she said, her eyes lingering on the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Really nice. I led them to the living room, offering them seats on the sofa while I took the armchair across from them. More silence followed. 13 years of it can't be erased in a few seconds. Would you like something to drink? I finally asked. Just water for me, Lisa said. Ted shook his head. I'm fine. So, you live here alone? Yes, I replied. Just me. Must be a lot of house for one person, Lisa commented, her tone casual but her meaning clear. I can manage, I said dryly. So, what brings you here after all this time? Ted and Lisa exchanged a quick glance before Ted cleared his throat. We saw an article about you, Dad, in Business Weekly, about how you sold your company for millions. He paused, watching my reaction. Why didn't you ever tell us you were so successful? You made it clear you didn't want any contact with me, I reminded him gently. And success came gradually. There wasn't a specific moment I could have called about. But still, Lisa interjected, family should know about these things. Ted is your son, after all. Yes, I said, looking directly at Ted. He is my son, the son I haven't seen or spoken to in 13 years because that was his choice. Ted had the grace to look embarrassed, but it passed quickly. Look, Dad, I know we had our differences, but families argue. It's what they do. And then they move past it. Is that what we're doing now? Moving past it? I asked. Ted nodded eagerly. Yes, exactly. Water under the bridge. We're here now, and we're family. I studied my son's face, searching for sincerity. What I saw instead was calculation. The same expression Ted had as a teenager when trying to convince me he needed the latest video game console that all his friends had. So tell me what's been happening in your lives, I said, deciding to see where this would lead. Lisa jumped in before Ted could answer. It's been rough, honestly. The economy, you know. Ted has had some bad luck with jobs. His last company downsized 6 months ago, and the job market is terrible right now. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, meaning it despite my suspicions. What's your field now, Ted? He waved vaguely. Marketing, business development, that sort of thing. In between opportunities at the moment. And you, Lisa? Are you working? She laughed as if I'd said something amusing. I do some social media consulting here and there. Freelance work. Nothing full-time. It's hard to find something that really values my talents. I nodded, piecing together their situation from what they weren't saying. So where are you living now? They exchanged another of those quick glances that spoke volumes. That's part of why we're here, Ted admitted. We had to leave our apartment last month. The landlord was completely unreasonable about late payments. We're staying with a friend temporarily, Lisa added, but it's not ideal, not for people our age. I waited, knowing there was more coming. Ted fidgeted with the sleeve of his shirt, a habit he had since childhood when approaching a difficult subject. Dad, I know this might seem sudden, but we've been doing a lot of thinking, he began. Seeing that article about you, learning about your success, it felt like maybe this was a sign. A chance for us to reconnect, to be a family again. That's a nice thought, I said carefully. And it got us thinking, Ted continued, his words coming faster now. You have this huge house, all to yourself, all this space, all this success. And we're family, your only family. There it was. The real reason for their sudden reappearance in my life. What exactly are you suggesting, Ted? He straightened his shoulders, gathering his courage. We think we should move in here, with you. This place is way too big for one person. You must get lonely. We could keep you company, help around the house. He gestured expansively. It's what families do. They take care of each other. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. And as Ted's wife, I'm family too. We belong together, all of us, under one roof. I kept my expression neutral with effort. And this has nothing to do with your current housing situation? Dad, Ted's voice took on an injured tone. That's not fair. Of course, we're in a tough spot right now. And yes, moving in would help us. But this is about more than that. It's about reconnecting, making up for lost time. Lisa leaned forward, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a sympathetic tone. Dennis, we know you must have regrets. 13 years is a long time to be alone, especially when you have a son who loves you. I nearly laughed at the transparent manipulation. Does he? I asked mildly. Love me, I mean? Ted looked flustered. Of course I do. You're my dad. Yet in 13 years, you never once reached out. Not a call, not a card, not even when you needed money, which I'm guessing happened quite often. Ted's face darkened. That was different. You made it clear you wouldn't help us financially. There was no point in asking. So you're asking now? Lisa jumped in smoothly. Not asking. Suggesting an arrangement that benefits everyone. You get your family back. We get stability. A fresh start. Ted nodded. Dad, as your son, I deserve a share in your success. That's just fair. You always taught me about fairness, remember? I did indeed teach him about fairness. Also about hard work, responsibility, and living within one's means. Lessons that clearly hadn't taken hold. We could start fresh here, Ted continued, warming to his subject. You have all this space anyway, and I know you must have put some of that money aside. Maybe you could help us get back on our feet properly. Invest in us. Invest in what, exactly? I asked. Lisa beamed. We have some amazing business ideas. With your backing, they could really take off. Ted has always had an entrepreneurial spirit, just like you. I doubted that very much, but I kept listening. So let me make sure I understand, I said slowly. You want to move into my home, have me support you financially, and invest in unspecified business ventures. All because we're family and you, as my son, deserve a share of my success. Is that about right? Ted smiled, apparently missing the skepticism in my voice. Exactly. I knew you'd understand, Dad. We can move in this weekend. Our stuff is mostly in storage anyway. I sat back in my chair, studying the two people before me. My son, who had cut me out of his life for 13 years. His wife, who had never shown me anything but disdain. Both now looking at me with barely concealed greed, eyeing my home as if measuring it for new furniture. I thought about the lonely years, the birthdays and holidays spent alone. I thought about the cards returned unopened, the calls unanswered. I thought about the accusation of emotional abuse through financial manipulation thrown at me because I wouldn't fund their extravagant lifestyle. And now here they were. Not with apologies or genuine desire for reconciliation, but with hands outstretched, expecting me to give them everything they wanted simply because we shared DNA. You'll need to think about this, I said finally. Ted's face fell. What is there to think about? We're family. This is what families do for each other. Is it? I asked quietly. Is this what you did for me these past 13 years? The room fell silent after my question. Ted shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, avoiding my gaze. Lisa placed her hand on his knee, a gesture that seemed more possessive than comforting. That's not fair, Dad, Ted finally said. That was different. How? I kept my voice calm, genuinely curious about how he justified the years of silence. You refused to support us, Ted said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. You made your choice, and we made ours. I nodded slowly. Yes, I refused to give you unlimited financial support for an unsustainable lifestyle, and you chose to cut me out of your life entirely. Those seem like very different choices to me. Lisa cut in, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to their agenda. The past is the past, Dennis. We're here now, trying to rebuild this family. Isn't that what matters? What matters, I said carefully, is understanding why you're really here. So let's talk honestly. Tell me about your lives these past 13 years. No glossing over details. Ted looked uncomfortable but started talking. After hesitating initially, the story came pouring out, though I noticed he framed everything as bad luck rather than poor choices. Head bounced between 6 different companies, never staying more than 2 years at any of them. The reasons for leaving varied from downsizing to personality conflicts with management to companies going under. Reading between the lines, I suspected performance issues were the real culprit. Lisa had never held a full-time job for more than a few months. She described herself as too creative for corporate environments, too independent for structured work. Her sporadic income came from occasional retail positions and vague consulting work she couldn't clearly define. Their financial situation was worse than I'd imagined. Not only were they currently homeless, having been evicted for non-payment of rent, but they carried substantial credit card debt, were behind on car payments, and had even borrowed money from Lisa's parents that they hadn't repaid. And what happened with that money? I asked. Barbara's house had considerable equity. After the divorce, she was financially secure. Did she help you? Ted squirmed visibly. Mom helped when she could, but she had her own expenses. She remarried, right? I remembered hearing about that years ago. Yeah, to Gary. Hess, all right. They moved to Arizona 5 years ago. And they don't help you financially now? Lisa sniffed. Her husband is very controlling about money, much like you were. I let the barb pass. And your parents, Lisa? You mentioned borrowing from them. Her face hardened. They cut us off last year, said they were enabling us, whatever that means. I knew exactly what it meant. They had realized what had taken me years to see, that Lisa and Ted would drain them dry if permitted. So to summarize, I said, you've gone through multiple jobs, accumulated significant debt, been evicted from your home, and burned bridges with both sets of parents. And now you've arrived at my doorstep, not because you miss me or want to rebuild our relationship, but because you discovered I have money. Ted slammed his hand on the coffee table. That's not fair. Yes, we're going through a rough patch. Yes, we need help. But you're twisting everything. I raised an eyebrow. Am I? You haven't asked about my life once since you arrived. You haven't expressed any regret for 13 years of silence. Your first suggestion was moving into my home and having me fund your lifestyle. Lisa tried a different tack, her voice softening. Dennis, we understand you might be hurt. Anyone would be. But Ted is your son, your only child. Whatever happened between you, that biological connection can't be broken. Doesn't that mean something to you? It means everything to me, I replied honestly, which is why I'm so disappointed in the man my son has become. Ted's face flushed with anger. Now you're judging me? After abandoning me? I abandoned you? I kept my voice level with effort. You were an adult who cut me off because I wouldn't buy you a house or fund an extravagant wedding. That was your choice, not mine. You never supported me, Ted shouted, standing up. You were always working, always absent, always critical. Nothing I did was ever good enough for you. I stayed seated, looking up at my son's angry face. It's interesting that you say that, Ted, because from where I'm sitting, I supported you your entire life. I paid for your education. I tried to teach you values that would help you succeed. I offered to help you in ways that would build your independence rather than foster dependence. You call that support? Ted scoffed. Other fathers gave their children real support, financial support, security. And where has that gotten them? I asked quietly. Are those children happy? Fulfilled? Can they stand on their own feet? This isn't a philosophical debate, Dad, Ted snapped. This is real life. Our life. We're struggling, and you sit here in this mansion, judging us for asking for help that you can easily afford to give. Lisa stood next to Ted, presenting a united front. We didn't want to do this, but you're giving us no choice. She pulled out her phone. I took pictures on the way in. Of the house, the view. I have a cousin who works at the tax assessor's office. We know how much this place is worth. My stomach tightened at the implied threat. And what do you plan to do with those pictures, Lisa? She smiled thinly. People might be interested to know that the famous Dennis Wilson, the self-made millionaire, refuses to help his only son while living in luxury. Ted jumped in, clearly following a rehearsed strategy. And if we have kids someday, how would it look if the story got out that you refused to even let your grandchildren have a roof over their heads? I looked at them both, these strangers who were supposedly my family, threatening me with public shaming if I didn't comply with their demands. In that moment, I felt a profound sadness, not anger. What had happened to the little boy I had once held in my arms? Where had I gone wrong? You would really do that? I asked softly. Use emotional blackmail to get what you want? Ted had the grace to look momentarily ashamed, but Lisa pressed on. We're desperate, Dennis. We wouldn't be here if we weren't. She gestured around the room. Look at all this. You could help us and never even feel it financially. What's fair about you having everything while your son has nothing? Fair, I repeated. That's an interesting word choice. What exactly would be fair in your minds? Ted and Lisa exchanged glances, seemingly encouraged that I was at least asking the question. For starters, living here, Ted said, in the main house, not some guest room. We need our space. A monthly allowance, Lisa added quickly. For expenses, living costs, and investment capital, Ted continued, gaining confidence. For business ventures. I have ideas, Dad. Good ones. With your backing, they could really take off. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. and maybe put the house in both your names. For estate planning purposes, it's just practical." I nearly laughed at the transparency of it. They weren't asking for help getting back on their feet. They were asking for a complete takeover of my life and assets. "Anything else?" I asked, my voice neutral. Ted hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Well, eventually, I think it's only right that I should have a say in your company. I am your son, your legacy. I should be involved in the business decisions." "I sold my company 3 years ago," I pointed out. "I no longer make business decisions." "Well, your investments then," Lisa said quickly. "Ted should be involved in those, for the future." It was clear now. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted control. Of my home, my money, my life. All under the guise of family obligation. "And if I decline?" I asked. Ted's face hardened. "Then I guess you're not the father I hoped you'd be. And everyone will know it." "We're not leaving," Lisa added firmly. "Not until this is settled. We have nowhere else to go." The implied threat hung in the air. They would stay, uninvited, creating a scene if necessary, using emotional manipulation and public pressure to get what they wanted. It was extortion, plain and simple, wrapped in the language of family obligation. I looked at my son, this stranger who shared my DNA but none of my values, and made a decision that had been 13 years in the making. I took a deep breath, centering myself as Ted and Lisa stood defiantly in my living room, their ultimatum hanging in the air between us. In that moment of clarity, I realized several things at once. First, I owed Ted nothing. Not because he had cut me off for 13 years, though that would have been reason enough, but because he was an adult responsible for his own choices and their consequences. Second, giving in to their demands would solve nothing. It would only postpone the inevitable crash and enable behavior that had already caused them significant harm. Real help would mean something entirely different. Third, and perhaps most importantly, I still loved my son. Despite everything, despite the years of silence, despite this crude attempt at extortion, he was still the baby I had held in my arms, the child I had taught to ride a bike, the young man I had hoped would grow into someone I could be proud of. While these thoughts crystallized in my mind, Ted and Lisa continued their bickering, threatening various ways they would make my life difficult if I didn't comply with their demands. I barely heard them, focused as I was on formulating my response. When I was ready, I stood up slowly, my movement surprising them into silence. I smiled, a genuine smile that seemed to confuse them both. "All right," I said calmly. "You can stay." The sudden shift caught them off guard. Ted blinked rapidly, suspicion warring with triumph on his face. Lisa recovered more quickly, a smile spreading across her features. "I knew you'd see reason," she said, already eyeing the artwork on the walls as if deciding what to keep and what to replace. "But there are conditions," I continued, my voice firm. "What conditions?" Ted asked warily. I gestured toward the large windows overlooking the property. "Do you see that building near the edge of the garden? The guest house?" They both turned to look at the small cottage visible in the distance. It was a charming structure, well-maintained but modest compared to the main house. "That's where you'll be staying," I said. Lisa turned back quickly, indignation flashing across her face. "The guest house? But that's tiny. We need space." "It's a 2-bedroom cottage with a full kitchen, living room, and office." "More than adequate for 2 people," I replied evenly. "But Dad," Ted protested, "the whole point was for us to be together. As a family." "Well, get to that," I assured him. "The guest house is condition 1. Condition 2 is that you, Ted, will work for your living." Ted frowned. "What do you mean, work for my living?" "I mean you'll take a position at Wilson Electrical Enterprises," I explained. "The company I founded may have been sold, but I retained a small division that handles local repairs and installations. You will start at the bottom, as an apprentice technician." "I'm not a handyman, Dad," Ted scoffed. "I have a business degree. I should be in management." "Management is earned, not given," I said firmly. "You'll start where everyone starts, learning the basics. If you prove yourself capable and reliable, advancement is possible." Lisa looked horrified. "You can't be serious. Ted fixing toasters, crawling under houses? That's beneath him." I raised an eyebrow. "Is honest work beneath anyone? I did that work for decades. It paid for your wedding, if I recall correctly." Ted crossed his arms defensively. And what about Lisa? Does she have to work too? That would be ideal, I said. But I'm not offering Lisa employment. That's her decision. This is ridiculous, Lisa spat. We are not living in some tiny cottage while you rattle around in this mansion. And Ted is not becoming some blue-collar repairman. We had a deal. I shook my head. We had no deal. You made demands, which I rejected. I'm now offering an alternative. Take it or leave it. Ted looked genuinely confused. But why? Why not just help us the way we asked? You have plenty of money. This house alone must be worth millions. Because money given is never valued as much as money earned, I explained patiently. Because 13 years ago, you cut me out of your life over this exact issue, and nothing has changed. You're still looking for handouts rather than opportunities. That's not fair, Ted protested. Isn't it? I asked quietly. Think about it, Ted. In 13 years, what have you built? What have you accomplished on your own merits? Forget about me and my supposed failings as a father for a moment. What responsibility do you take for where you are right now? The question hung in the air. Ted opened his mouth, then closed it again, seemingly at a loss for words. I softened my tone. I'm offering you a chance, Ted. A real chance. Not just a handout. Stable housing. Steady employment. A path to genuine independence. But it requires something from you too. Effort. Commitment. Responsibility. Lisa tugged at Ted's sleeve. Don't listen to him. This is manipulation. He just wants to control us. Ted ignored her, his eyes fixed on mine. You really think I could learn the business? I know you could, if you applied yourself, I said honestly. You always had potential, Ted. You just never had the motivation to develop it. And we'd really have to live in the guest house? He asked, glancing out the window again. Yes. It's comfortable, fully furnished, and rent-free. But it's not the main house, and it never will be. This is my home, not yours. Lisa made a sound of disgust. This is insulting. We are not charity cases for you to reform, Dennis. We came here as family, expecting to be treated as family. I turned to her, meeting her gaze directly. Family supports each other in ways that foster growth, not dependence. I'm offering Ted a chance to learn skills that will serve him for a lifetime, in a field that will always have demand. I'm offering you both secure housing while you rebuild your lives. That is what real family does. Ted seemed torn, looking between Lisa and me, indecision clear on his face. There was something in his expression I hadn't seen before, a flicker of something like respect, or perhaps just recognition. It's a trap, Lisa insisted. Hell hold this over our heads forever. I shook my head. There will be a formal employment contract, standard wages, standard expectations. The cottage will have a simple lease agreement, rent-free, but with clear terms. Everything in writing, everything transparent. No strings, no hidden agendas. Ted ran a hand through his thinning hair. I don't know, Dad. This isn't what we expected. No, I agreed. You expected to walk in here and take over my life and my assets without offering anything in return. That was never going to happen. This is the only deal on the table. Take it or leave it. Lisa pulled Ted aside, whispering furiously in his ear. I could see her gesturing at the house, at me, her body language aggressive and insistent. Ted listened, his expression conflicted. After several minutes of heated discussion, they turned back to me. Well, take it, Ted said. His voice resigned. For now, Lisa's face was a mask of barely controlled rage, but she nodded stiffly. Good, I said, feeling a strange mixture of hope and caution. I'll have the paperwork drawn up tomorrow. You can move into the cottage this weekend. Ted, you'll start work on Monday, 8 a.m. sharp. Fine, Ted muttered. I showed them to the door, explaining that I'd be in touch with details for moving in and starting work. As they walked to their car, I could hear Lisa berating Ted for giving in so easily. He responded too quietly for me to hear the words, but his posture was more assertive than I'd seen it before. After they drove away, I sat on my porch, watching the ocean and wondering if I'd done the right thing. Was I setting myself up for more heartache? Or was there a chance, however small, that this arrangement could lead to something positive? Only time would tell. The first few weeks were as difficult as I expected. Ted showed up for work on Monday morning, clearly uncomfortable in the work uniform and steel-toed boots I'd provided. His hands were soft, unused to physical labor, and by the end of the first day, they were covered in blisters despite the gloves. To his credit, he returned the next morning, though I could tell each step was painful. I assigned him to shadow Marcus, my most patient technician, starting with simple tasks like organizing tools and carrying equipment. Ted struggled with even these basics, dropping expensive parts and mixing up inventory. His frustration was evident, especially when younger apprentices performed tasks with ease that he found challenging. At home, things were no better. Lisa made no effort to maintain the cottage, leaving dishes piled in the sink and clothes strewn about. She spent most days watching television or browsing social media, complaining constantly about the isolation and lack of entertainment. When Ted suggested she look for work, their arguments could be heard across the garden. I kept my distance, giving them space to adjust while maintaining clear professional boundaries at work. Ted reported to Marcus, not to me, and was subject to the same rules and expectations as any other employee. I made sure he received no special treatment, positive or negative. By the end of the first month, I was beginning to doubt my decision. Ted seemed to be going through the motions without real engagement, and Lisa had made no effort to contribute positively to the situation. They still viewed their stay as temporary, something to endure until a better option came along. The turning point came unexpectedly in the third month. A customer brought in an expensive refrigerator with a complex problem that had stumped even our most experienced technicians. During a team meeting to discuss the issue, Ted hesitantly raised his hand. "Have you checked the compressor relay?" he asked. "I was reading in the manual last night, and it mentioned that model has a design flaw that can cause similar symptoms." The room fell silent. Ted never volunteered information in meetings, and had certainly never admitted to studying manuals after hours. Marcus checked the relay, and sure enough, Ted was right. The customer was thrilled, and Ted received his first genuine compliment from the team. That small success seemed to light a spark. Ted began asking more questions, staying late to learn about different systems, even watching tutorial videos at home. His hands toughened up, and his posture changed, shoulders straighter, movements more confident. Lisa noticed the change too, though her initial reaction was negative. She complained that he was too tired in the evenings, that he talked about work too much, that he was becoming just like me. A criticism she meant as an insult, but which secretly pleased us both. 4 months into our arrangement, Ted approached me at the end of a workday. It was the first time Ted initiated a personal conversation since moving into the cottage. "Dad," he said hesitantly, "I was thinking about the Johnson project, the smart home integration they're asking for." "Yes?" I encouraged, curious where this was going. "I've been researching some new systems that might work better than what we usually install. More energy efficient, easier interface. Would it be okay if I put together a proposal?" I was surprised but tried not to show it. "Of course. Talk to Marcus about the budget constraints, but innovation is always welcome." Ted nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Thanks, Dad." That proposal turned into Ted's first major contribution to the company. The Johnsons loved his ideas, and their project became a showcase we used to attract similar high-end clients. Ted beamed with pride during the final walkthrough, explaining features with genuine enthusiasm. At home, changes were happening too. Lisa, perhaps spurred by Ted's growing confidence, had taken a part-time position at a local boutique. It wasn't a career, but it was a start. The cottage was cleaner, their arguments less frequent. They even invited me for dinner occasionally, simple meals that showed effort, if not culinary skill. 6 months in, Ted received his first promotion to junior technician, based entirely on his own merit. The team celebrated with a small gathering after work, and I watched from a distance as Ted accepted congratulations, his smile more genuine than I had seen in decades. That night, Ted knocked on my door, a 6-pack of beer in hand. "Got time for a drink?" he asked, looking both nervous and determined. We sat on my porch, watching the sunset in comfortable silence for a while. When Ted finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I owe you an apology, Dad," he said, staring at his bottle rather than meeting my eyes. A big one. I waited, giving him space to continue. "You were right, all those years ago. About everything. About me, about Lisa, about what we needed versus what we wanted." He took a deep breath. "I'm sorry I cut you out of my life. I'm sorry I blamed you for my failures." The words I had waited 13 years to hear. I felt my throat tighten but managed to keep my voice steady. Thank you for saying that, Ted. It means a lot. He nodded, still not looking up. The thing is, Dad, I never really understood what you were trying to teach me. About working for what you get. About the satisfaction of earning something. He finally raised his eyes to mine. I get it now, and it feels good. I smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. It does feel good, doesn't it? That's something no one can give you. You have to earn it yourself. Yeah, he agreed softly. Lisa feels it too, though she won't admit it yet. She's proud of her paycheck, small as it is. She's talking about taking some online classes. We talked for hours that night, really talked, as we hadn't done since Ted was a child. About the business, about his ideas for expanding our services, about his growing interest in the technical aspects of the work, about his regrets for the lost years and his hopes for the future. Not once did he mention moving into the main house or ask for financial support beyond his earned salary. The transformation continued over the following months. Ted worked his way up to full technician status, then team leader. Lisa completed an online certificate in interior design and found work with a local firm, discovering a genuine talent for the field. They saved enough from their combined incomes to buy a modest car, paying cash rather than taking out a loan. On the one-year anniversary of their arrival, Ted and Lisa invited me to dinner at the cottage. They had prepared a proper meal, set the table nicely, even bought a bottle of good wine. After dinner, Ted handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, curious. "Open it," he said, exchanging a smile with Lisa. Inside was a check, made out to me, for a substantial amount. "Rent," Ted explained. "For the past year. We know we agreed it would be free, but we want to pay our way." I started to protest, but Ted held up a hand. "Please, Dad, we need to do this. For us, not for you." I understood then. This wasn't about the money. It was about self-respect, about standing on their own feet, about transforming from takers to contributors. I accepted the check with a nod of acknowledgement. "There's something else," Lisa added, her expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "We found our own place, a small condo near downtown. We're moving out next month." I felt a surprising pang of disappointment. "You don't have to go. You're welcome to stay." Ted shook his head. "We need to do this, Dad. We appreciate everything more than we can say, but it's time for us to be completely independent." The pride I felt in that moment was indescribable. My son, who a year ago had come to my door demanding handouts, was now choosing independence even when the comfortable option was available. They moved into their condo the following month. It was nothing fancy, a two-bedroom unit in a decent neighborhood, but it was entirely theirs, paid for with money they had earned. I helped them move, of course, and was touched when Ted asked if I would come for dinner once they were settled. Ted continued working for the company, eventually taking over management when I decided to fully retire. He had earned the position through hard work and innovative thinking, respected by the team for his knowledge and fair leadership. Lisa built a successful interior design business, specializing in affordable makeovers for average families rather than luxury projects for the wealthy. 2 years after our reunion, Ted and Lisa invited me to dinner at their condo. They had news to share, they said, something important. I arrived to find them both practically glowing with excitement. "We're having a baby," Ted announced, his arm around Lisa's shoulders. "You're going to be a grandfather." The joy that flooded through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just because of the baby news, but because of who Ted and Lisa had become, the solid foundation they had built for this child through their own efforts. Later that evening, as we sat on their small balcony watching the stars, Ted turned to me with serious eyes. "Dad," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. This child will never have to learn the hard way like I did. We're going to teach him or her the values you tried to teach me. About working for what you get, about responsibility and independence." My eyes misted over as I nodded. "That's the best gift you could give them, Ted." He hesitated, then added, "And we're going to need your help." My heart skipped a beat, old fears resurfacing. "What kind of help?" Ted laughed, seeing my expression. "Not financial help. God, no. We're fine in that department." He grew serious again. "I mean your wisdom, your experience, your presence in our child's life. I want my son or daughter to know their grandfather, to learn from you directly the things I was too stubborn to learn." The circle was complete. The 13 years of silence had been painful, a desert I had crossed alone. But the relationship that emerged on the other side was stronger, more authentic, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for our children is to let them face the consequences of their choices, to find their own way through difficulty rather than clearing every obstacle from their path. It's a hard truth that many parents struggle to accept, myself included. We want to protect our children from pain, from failure, from hardship, but in doing so, we may rob them of the very experiences that build character and capability. My son had to fall before he could learn to stand on his own. He had to fail before he could truly succeed. And I had to let him go before we could find our way back to each other as equals, as men who respect each other. Today, Ted and Lisa live modestly but comfortably in a house they bought themselves. Their daughter, my granddaughter Emily, is the joy of my life. When she visits, she runs through the halls of my too-big house, filling it with the laughter I once only dreamed of hearing. Ted teaches her to fix things with her own hands, to value work well done. Lisa teaches her creativity and resilience. And I tell her stories about her father and the long journey that brought us all together again. If you've ever had to make the difficult choice between what someone wants and what they need, I hope this story gives you courage. Sometimes love means standing firm, even when it's painful. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is the space for someone to find their own strength, their own path, their own pride in what they've earned, rather than what they've been given. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice out of love? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories from my journey. Remember to share this video with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Thank you for listening, and may you find the wisdom to know when to give freely and when to hold back in love.